Welcome to Money Talks with Cathy Yang, your intel on the Philippine markets and the economy. An escalation in the global trade war. The U.S. slaps tariffs in Canada, Mexico, and China. China and Canada retaliate. As the gloves come off, Beijing descends into its biggest annual political huddle. That's a live shot there in Beijing of the National People's Congress at the Great Hall of the People. They have just announced a 5% GDP target despite the new U.S. tariffs. And Philippine headline inflation for February slows to 2.1%, strengthening the case for rate cuts. You're looking at a live shot there of the media conference going on at the Philippine Statistics Authority, where earlier this hour, Deputy National Statistician Divina Gracia del Prado announced Philippine headline inflation in February slowed to 2.1%. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, fell to 2.5% year-on-year in February from 2.9% in January, led by the decline in prices of vegetables and tubers, particularly tomatoes, as well as cereals and cereal products. The result also settles below the Bangko Central's month-ahead inflation forecast of between 2.2 to 3% in February. The February print was also lower than the 2.6% median estimate in a Business World poll of 18 analysts. This would also be the lowest monthly print in 4 months, or since the 2.3% recorded in October. Slower consumer price gains lift bets of an April 3 policy rate cut by the Bangko Central. And as the chatter grows over the timing and pace of the next easing worries over the Trump session or a recession caused by President Trump, inflation has slowed to 2.1% compared with 2.9% in January. A 25% U.S. tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods and an additional 10% on Chinese imports took effect at 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday in the U.S., setting off a day of market unease and retaliation from America's largest trading partners. Born out of these countries' supposed failure to curb fentanyl deaths in the U.S., the tariffs are set to upend about $2 trillion in annual U.S. trade. The duties are sparking concerns of U.S. price increases, running counter to Trump's election vow to bring down living costs for Americans. Analysts also fear that the levies would bring Canada and the U.S. toward economic disaster. For their part, Canada and Mexico swiftly struck back.
Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Therefore, we have decided to respond with tariff and non-tariff measures that I will announce in a public square next Sunday. It is by no means our purpose to start an economic or trade confrontation, which unfortunately and regrettably is the opposite of what we should be doing, that is, integrating our economies more to strengthen our region.
U.S. stocks fall at the close of Tuesday's session after a day of volatile trading. Both the Dow and the S&P 500 are down over 1% each. The tech-heavy Nasdaq declines by 0.3%. Earlier in the day, the Nasdaq reached correction territory, down more than 10% from its peak. Stocks that fell were sharpest were companies most exposed to tariffs, including General Motors, Tesla, and Best Buy. And Trump's tariffs loom over China's parliament as it begins its annual political session today, Wednesday. Just moments ago, a government report prepared for the meeting shows China has kept its 5% economic growth target. Beijing also aims for a budget deficit of 4% of its GDP in 2025, up from 3% last year. Premier Cathy Yang will deliver a speech later in the day with a commitment for more fiscal resources to boost household demand, help the real estate sector, and mitigate the impact of U.S. tariffs. Earlier, Beijing retaliated against Trump's duties by imposing an additional 10 to 15% tariffs on U.S. food products and 25% on firms under export and investment restrictions. A spokesman for China's foreign ministry condemned Washington's latest salvo.
If the U.S. really wants to solve the fentanyl issue, it should consult with China on the basis of equality, respect, and mutual benefit to address each other's concerns. If the U.S. has ulterior motives and insists on launching a tariff war, trade war, or any other kind of war, China won't back down even a little bit. We suggest the U.S. side cease its bullying tactics immediately and return to the right path of dialogue and cooperation at an early date.
European markets are not spared by Trump's tariffs, with investors worried about global growth and whether similar levies could be imposed on Europe. The pan-European closed Tuesday lower by 2%. That is the worst session since August 2024. And German stocks fell by over 3% from the record highs we've seen on Monday. And looking at the euro currency exchange leapt to a 3-month high above 106 US dollars. And this comes after Berlin's conservatives and social democrats announced proposals to set up a 500 billion euro fund for infrastructure and overhaul borrowing rules aimed at increasing defense spending. Now, former U.S. trade negotiator Stephen Olson told me on this program hours before the tariffs took effect, the impact of reciprocal tariffs may be bigger and more damaging than first expected.
Certainly, the Philippines will be hit hard, but if there's any consolation, I think some of the neighboring countries will be hit even harder. And although the Philippines does enjoy a trade surplus with the United States, it's considerably smaller, certainly than Vietnam, Malaysia, and some other countries in the region. So bad news for the Philippines. If there's any consolation, though, some of the neighboring countries are likely to be affected even more adversely.
Let's take a look at our markets. Minutes after the PSA announced that inflation slowed in February to 2.1%, that is lower than the lower end of the Bangko Central's expectations for inflation. PSEI is down about 0.1% at 6,060. We're barely just above 6,000. As you know, the market closed on Tuesday up by nearly 0.5% ahead of the inflation result. Let's take a look at the peso and see how that's doing. It is stronger. At 57.62 the dollar, we ended at 57.75 on Tuesday. As the global trade war unfolds, the Philippines hones in on its latest inflation numbers. Our guest here predicted a 2.3% gain for February. Dino Aquino is head of fixed income department at SB Trust and Asset Management at Security Bank. He recently won for a 5th time at the CFA Society Philippines Best Managed Fund for the Peso Bond Fund category. So good to see you, Dino. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm a big fan, by the way.
Thank you. And a very critical day that you joined, and you were afraid last night that you might not have gotten it right, but I think you came close
to it, yeah.
2.3% you forecast, but it came down to 2.1.
2.1, yeah. Well, I'm on the downside. I was predicting on the downside, mostly because it's not me that goes to the market. I have my yaya goes to the market, and we do our research. Mostly food prices have come down a lot, except partly because maybe my estimate missed a little bit because I was expecting rice to be much lower. I think rice prices have been the lowest since 2019. But
I was actually surprised to be reading tubers, tomatoes, cereal products. These are not really the typical staples that we watch out for in terms of inflation.
It's actually galunggong, if you know.
Is it?
It's the galunggong.
Okay.
Some
YouTubers.
I have a professor in college that he mentioned that the galunggong is actually the indicator of inflation. So
yes.
it's a lot lower on a month-on-month basis. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I wanted to get into the interest rate differentials
Yep.
right now because we've been tracking the
Yeah.
U.S. Treasury yields 10-year.
Yeah.
It's been going down
Yeah.
since President Trump said, I want that to come down, rather than pressure the Fed
The
to
Fed
do what it
to
has to
cut
do
rates, right.
to cut rates. But when you look at
The
the
local.
10-year of the local, it's pretty much stayed steady. And I was
Yeah.
thinking maybe, oops, maybe, is that an aberration there? I mean, it's supposed to be tracking it downwards as well, but it hasn't. How
I think
come?
it's more of the disappointment probably on the rate cut. They were expecting
The
a
rate
rate
cut that
cut
didn't come last
come.
February 14th.
But for me, if you look at the language that the BSP communicated, I think it's a dovish hold. So meaning they mentioned that they recently delivered triple R cuts, right? And they mentioned that April is on the table, which the market is not really pricing in. Right now, the market, if you look at the market, it's more of they have the duration fear. If you look at the yield curve, it steepened quite a lot this year after being relatively flat for the entire year in 2024. It steepened a lot this year. So meaning a lot of cash is there, but a lot of them are going on the short end of the curve rather than the long end.
So it's a dovish hold, but today presents a new opportunity for the Bangko Central to make another statement,
Yeah.
which we're waiting for
Which
because
we're-
it's lower than the lowest end
Yeah.
of its estimate, which is
Yeah.
2.2.
Yeah.
We went to
Actually,
2.1. How do you think that might affect the 10-year yield then?
ideally, it will
It's now
move
at
lower.
6.15,
Yeah,
if
6.15,
I'm not
6.15.
mistaken.
Yeah, it's roughly around there. So it's relatively flat on a year-to-date from closing last year. So I'm looking at the move lower. Actually, earlier I had another guesting early part of this year, even before the Trump inauguration. I was asked for a fearless forecast. I mentioned that rates will go down. If there's
By
one
how
thing,
much then? I mean, if we did 2.1 today, do you think we'd go 75 basis points? Because the market has it at 50 basis
yeah,
points.
I think 75 is actually conservative. If you look at pre-pandemic, the spread between the inflation rate and the policy rate is around 150. So right now, it's huge. Say if we average 3% conservatively, we average 3%, and then your policy rate is at 5.75. Technically, they have 125 basis points room to cut rates. So 75 for me is a little bit conservative, if you ask me.
Conservative, but
Yeah.
we haven't even talked about the Fed's moves. I mean, do they necessarily have
yeah,
to follow the Fed's moves
Ideally,
as a sort of an insurance?
Yeah,
policy?
ideally they should, but I think the Philippines can decouple. They are inflation sensitive. If you look at 2019, going back to 2019, when the BSP then cut 75 basis points, they tracked the inflation rate. The inflation rate at that time, the average was 2.5%. And we ended the year in terms of policy rates at 4. So that's the 150 that I mentioned. So we can actually decouple if this inflation trend continues to be favorable moving forward.
What about the other bigger elephant in the room, China? It
China?
has held at its 5% GDP.
Yeah.
Can we decouple, and can we have to consider whatever happens there as well before we make any moves
For me,
in
I
which
think
tenors we invest in?
for me, the real elephant in the room that people don't really talk about that much is the doji. I don't know how you call it, the
Right.
dodge.
The Department of Government Efficiency,
Yeah.
Elon Musk. You mean?
Yeah, I mean
Okay.
Elon Musk, right? I have this thing. I usually look at his tweets. He tweets like 100 times a day. But there are tweets that are actually very significant. He tweeted during I think, early part of the campaign, right, that he wanted a reset button in terms of the U.S. If you look at the U.S. economy, I think it's due for a correction. You mentioned earlier the correction in the stock market. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit overvalued. I mean, everyone's talking about it. It's overvalued. There's this Buffett indicator, all those stuff. So I guess his Doji initiative, how do you call it?
Doge.
Doge.
That's what I hear. Just as a final point, what's the sweet spot then? Where do we go for the yield to maturity when tenors?
I think I like the long end right now.
Long end would be 10-year.
10-year, yeah.
Got it. We'll hold you to that then.
Yeah,
I wish we had more time, but thank you so much,
Yeah.
Nino. I appreciate the time.
Yes,
and the
thank you.
expertise there, you got it right. Nearly got it right.
Yeah.
2.3%. Dino Aquino of SB Trust and Asset Management at Security Bank. And we have world news coming right up. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky expresses regret over his recent meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. And the Vatican says Pope Francis' condition remains stable. We have an update from the Vatican. These and more stories only here on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Construction is now underway for the 2.2 billion peso NLEX C5 Northlink Section 1A. NLEX Corp, a unit of Metro Pacific Tollways Corp, broke ground on the project Tuesday, March 4th. MPTC President Jose Lim says it will improve access between NLEX, Valenzuela City, and Quezon City. Section 1A covers the first 2 kilometers of the planned 11.3-kilometer expressway. It is set to be completed by early 2026. The project aims to ease congestion in Quezon City by extending NLEX from Mindanao Toll Plaza to Quirino Highway. MPTC says it will cut travel time and help decongest EDSA, Commonwealth Avenue, and Mindanao Avenue. NLEX recently partnered with China Road and Bridge Corporation for the construction. The full segment, 8.2, will cost 24 billion pesos, but the timeline depends on right-of-way clearance. LT Group posted a record net income of nearly 29 billion pesos in 2024, up 14% from the previous year. The company's revenue grew 12% to 129 billion pesos, with all business segments seeing gains. The tobacco unit rose 12% to nearly 13 billion pesos, driven by higher dividends and forex gains. Meanwhile, Philippine National Bank saw higher income from increased interest earnings. Tanduay Distillers' profit posted a 37% increase to over 2 billion pesos, while Asia Brewery rose 46% to 841 million pesos. However, Eton Properties' net income declined as leasing revenue fell 1% due to lower occupancy and rental rates. LG Group shares closed up 1.3% yesterday. LT Group shares are now trading by nearly 0.2% from yesterday's close. Security Bank posted a record net income of over 11 billion pesos in 2024, up 23.4% from the previous year. Its total revenue rose 28% to nearly 55 billion pesos, driving strong performance. In the fourth quarter alone, its net income rose 81% to almost 3 billion pesos, while revenue rose 27% to nearly 15 billion pesos. Security Bank President and CEO Sanjeev Vora says growth and investment were the defining outcomes in 2024. He also said that the bank will carry this momentum into 2025 to enhance services and fulfill its better banking promise. Security shares closed up 1.4% yesterday. Shares are now trading up by over 1% from yesterday's close. For more details on these stories, visit Business World online. are the headlines from around the globe. In the U.S., Trump will address Congress for the first time since he returned to the White House. The speech is set to begin at around 9 p.m. New York time. That is 10 a.m. Manila time. That's in 15 minutes. Among the topics that Trump will touch on include launching a trade war with allies, slashing the federal workforce, and signing a minerals deal with Ukraine. And in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky vows to repair relations with the U.S. as he regrets Friday's clash with Trump. The wartime leader says he wants to make things right and vowed to sign the minerals deal anytime soon. The fate of the much-debated deal remains unclear as no signing date is scheduled yet. Meantime, defense secretaries from the U.S. and U.K. will meet on Thursday to discuss a peace plan for Ukraine. And in the Vatican, Pope Francis is stable throughout Tuesday with no new respiratory crisis. The Holy See says the 88-year-old pontiff has no fever, is alert, and has collaborated with his treatment. The bulletin is the second cautiously upbeat report of the day after the Vatican press office said earlier that the Pope's condition stabilized on Monday. Francis has been at Rome's Gemelli Hospital since February 14. Still in the Pope's health, one news anchor, Gretchen Ho, was able to talk to the Philippine ambassador to the Holy See, Myla Makahilig. Here's her report from Rome.
Ash Wednesday today will miss Pope Francis as he continues to recover from double pneumonia.
We gained more insight into the Pope's condition from the Philippine ambassador to the Holy See.
Kita naman, probably from around the Christmas season kasi hectic yan for the Vatican. He had difficulty breathing talaga. And hindi niya natatapos yung homily or yung mga catechesis niya. But for a man his age, he keeps a very punishing schedule na I guess he starts at 8 o'clock. And then sunod-sunod yan yung mga appointments niya. Even sa nababasa ko sa schedule niya, I get tired from just reading yung anong mga activities that he is supposed to do during the day. And he travels. But nakita ko rin from engagements and encounters dun sa Vatican that he gets a boost when he meets people, especially the youth. If may occasions during papal masses na may maraming mga kabataan and they keep shouting his name, mas lalong humahaba yung kanyang ikot.
Makahilig says the unprecedented daily health updates being released by the Vatican are a response to the call of the public. It is no surprise, though, as Pope Francis has made significant changes during his time as Pope.
He leads from the ranks. Hindi siya yung somebody who's way up there na detached and parang difficult to get to. His accessibility is something that endears him and makes for a good leader kasi nakikita ng tao na he is one of them.
As to whether his health deteriorated due to a widening gap in the Vatican's finances and a reported clash with cardinals due to Pope Francis' creation of a high-level task force to do a Vatican-wide auditing,
I think a lot of the niya was really to do a system change. Hindi lang naman siya nag-target ng individuals. It wasn't really a witch hunt na targeting a particular person, but ang administrative changes that he has pushed was really to make the Vatican city-state and the church itself function better and do its work more efficiently and get the benefits to the intended recipients talaga.
and with the Pope's roller coaster of a ride in the hospital, the Filipino faithful continue to express its solidarity even from within the Vatican.
Praying is something that has always been a strong suit for any believer. So we continue to pray that he pulls through with this one. And we also pray for the church itself, no, na just like any other entity that could be facing transition, that it will stand firm and continue on.
And as the world teeters on the escalating global trade war, a silver lining for the Philippines. Its recent removal from the dirty money gray list, seen as boosting investor confidence and financial stability. But Moody's says continuous oversight is still called for to mitigate potential risks. Chun Hong Chua is the head of the Financial Crime Practice Group for Asia Pacific and the Middle East at Moody's, and he joins us now live from Singapore. Good to see you, Chun. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you, Kevin. Pleasure to be here.
So did you see this coming, the Philippines exiting the gray list last month? Because before we exited, you gave a lot of guidance there.
This is something that we've all been hopeful for a long time. There's a lot of effort that was put in the last 4 years to improve, the standards and the quality of the AML, processes within the banking sector. So definitely something that we were hoping for to happen. And I think there's a lot of, confidence in the banking sector right now, that the effort has now been proven to be very effective.
I know it's a lot to be happy about given all the uncertainties we're facing overseas. What is your assessment then of the Philippines' anti-money laundering enforcement profile?
I think in the last 4 years, what we've seen is the banks have now taken a step into improving the technology, using technology and data to improve all the effectiveness within the anti-money laundering operations. So, this will definitely help to mitigate a lot of the crimes that surrounding anti-money laundering, right? We need to know that some of this dirty money, where it's coming from, is a lot of organized crime, and the gatekeepers to all these financial transactions are definitely the banks, and we've seen that they are now really improving their processes to look at some of these funds that's coming in and out from the organized crime. One thing to note, you cannot prevent this organized crime from trying to infiltrate the Philippines, right? But what you can do is to try to make sure that you keep as much of it out of the Philippines financial ecosystem as much as possible. And from the regulatory point of view, the outright ban on the POGOs is definitely a great start that we've seen, right? A lot of will coming from the Filipino government.
Right, I see, we hear you. I mean, the risk of the Philippines going in and out of the gray list, that's something we don't want. We've seen countries in the past do just that. So what exactly do we need to do to make sure that the structures are in place and that the follow-through is made?
The first step is definitely continuing the regulatory enforcement oversight effort from AMLC. We know that AMLC has been doing a lot of audits, thematic testings on the banks to make sure that all the banks upkeep their level and their standards. So this continuous effort needs to be there. I think also the continuous monitoring of the advancing threats coming from overseas by the government is important, right? So we've now seen the emergence, or rather I should say the re-emergence of scam centers, human trafficking that's happening around the region. I think then, you have to continuous upkeep with countermeasures to make sure that your financial system and the whole economy is not adversely affected. And you need to have a policy in order to always upkeep with all these emerging threats that's coming out.
It's really sound advice that we need during this time of uncertainty. Thank you so much, Chun Chonghua of Moody's in Singapore, joining us live there.
Thank you, Ken.
And before we go, let's take a look at these phones made for Gen Z creators. Guess what the name is? Nothing. Yeah, that's the name, the company name. It aims to be the latest phone brand that the cool kids are after. They launched their latest models, the Phone 3A series, at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Nothing is pinning its success to its cameras. The 3A Pro has a periscope camera which allows for 3x zoom that can be boosted to 60 times with the help of, guess what? AI. Simple as that. Phone 3A's telephoto lens can zoom 2 times, but AI can again take it further to 60 times. The 3A phone starts at 329 pounds or just a little over 24,000 pesos, and Phone 3A Pro will cost 449 pounds, or over 33,000 pesos. What do they say, those young ones? My kid says, slay. Well, that is it for Money Talks with Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. here on One News. Have a great day.